So after the May 20th work session, the board asked the manager to re-examine the budget for additional savings. So went back to the department heads and we talked about where could we find money. This was not an easy exercise for any of us. We all participated in it, by the way. But we did come up with $125,000 in cuts. And so this does create a potential to decrease the budget by a quarter of a penny. So instead of 28 cents, it could be 27.75 cents. However, I am not recommending we do that. And what I'm recommending, that third bullet there, instead of decreasing the tax rate, that we take that $125,000 savings, we transfer it into the capital improvement plan, that's our CIP, and we do additional paving. This is an ongoing issue that we have throughout the town with our streets. The town is relatively new by many standards, but our streets are starting to age, so we would recommend putting that into the CIP. Some other questions that came out of the discussion on the 20th was the fund balance, which is another word of our savings account. So the latest audit we have, which is fiscal year 2018, the Matthews fund balance available, which is both assigned and unassigned. And assigned means things like stormwater fees. We just can't use those for anything. Or Powell bill funds. We can't use those for anything. We got to use them for roads. And then unassigned, which is free use. The town really literally is our savings account, but that number is 47.82%, which is great, by the way. I did want to share with the board, the state of North Carolina tracks all this stuff through the Treasurer's Office, Secretary of Treasury. And in our group, which is 10,000, 49,000, that's a pretty big group. And then non-electric, there are some towns in North Carolina that have electric as a utility. The average was 55.5%. So while we have a great fund balance, I did want everybody to understand we are a little bit below average. We're doing fantastic, but that's kind of as a guidepost that as a manager, I do like to see what are our comparable cities doing. All right, so the other question came up was, what about revenue? How are we doing on revenue? And so Assistant Manager Becky Hawk and I looked at Lindsay, thank you, Lindsay. That was a terrible feeling, by the way. Lindsay, thank you very much, Lindsay. We looked at our budget, and we do appear to be revenues. We think revenues are going to exceed what we budgeted by about $370,000. Now, the only caveat I would say that with some of the things, like the state gives us quarterly reimbursements 4 times a year, we've only received one from the state of North Carolina. Our second one will come in June 15th. Sales tax runs 45 days in arrears, so there are some projections there. But so the good news there, we think based just on this one look at revenue that we're going to add to our fund balance next year. Another question came up about longevity pay. Longevity is in the budget for our employees. We've been doing it a long time. I've been here 16 years. I know it's been in place those 16 years. The cost in next year's budget is about $73,500. So the question at the work session was, what are our other cities doing? And we do kind of consider other cities or other cities in our market our competitors at some level, very tight labor market. And so there's about 14 localities that we look at. 7 of them did have some form of longevity, so 7 of them didn't have any longevity. And then the pay ranges ranged from a low of 100, which was Mecklenburg County, to thousands of dollars annually, which was Huntersville. So of those 7 that do offer it, 4 of them are higher than Matthews, 3 of them are lower than Matthews. So I guess my takeaway is that it's not like we're an outlier with this longevity payment, and it is what a lot of our competitors are doing, and we're about in the middle of those that do that. Okay, so the last thing, and maybe the most difficult to get your hands around, is revenue neutral. And Mecklenburg County performs a reevaluation of real property every 8 years. They can do it more often, by the way, but state law says at least every 8 years. Ms. Hawk and I worked very hard on this, and Becky, you're going to help walk us through this.
Sure. So as part of tonight's budget presentation, we wanted to take a couple minutes to just walk through the math of how revenue neutral is calculated during a revaluation year. It's kind of a complex process, and so we just wanted to make sure that we could distill it down as simply as possible to hopefully have folks be able to follow the math through this. So if you look at that top line, the first step in calculating revenue neutral is to take a look at what your property valuation was prior to revaluation. So in this current year, the valuation for all property in Matthews is about $3.5 billion. That's going to include your real estate, vehicles, business tools, public utilities, everything. After revaluation, so looking at next year's budget, the expected valuation of all of those things is expected to increase to about $4.8 billion. That is a projection from the county that does take into account the expected appeal loss from folks who weren't totally happy with the valuation that came from the county, who have appealed it and are going through that process now. That's a many-month process that the county is dealing with, so those numbers aren't completely finalized. So the $4.87 billion is a little bit of a projection at this point, but that is guidance from the county that we're utilizing at this point. So if you look at the difference between the $3.5 billion and the $4.8 billion, that represents an increase of 38.3% across all lines. The next step in calculating revenue neutral is to take a look at what your property tax rate is in this current year. So we're currently at 35.5 cents per hundred. If you look at the matching blue, you then roll that 35.5 cents back 38.3%. So that gives us a reduction of almost 10 cents in order to produce an equivalent tax levy. So what that means is the amount of tax revenue that we would generate on $3.5 billion in valuation at the 35.5 cents is equal to the amount of tax that we would generate at the 4.8 billion valuation and this lower rate of 25.67 cents per hundred. In a normal tax year, when we're not doing revaluation, we also have what's considered natural growth. So that's a lot of the development that you see around town, things coming out of the ground, that produces additional tax revenue for us on a normal basis. But that gets wiped away in a revaluation year. So to help us equate for that, what the state mandates that we do is we then take a look at what was the average annual property tax growth year over year for the past 8 years. So what was the growth from FY12 to FY13, FY13 to FY14, 14 to 15, and so on. You take all of that growth from year to year and you average it. And when we did that, our average over the 8 years was 1.83% year over year. You then go back to that equivalent levy tax rate of the 25.67, and then you increase it by that 1.83%, which gets us to the revenue neutral tax rate with that growth factored in of 26.13 cents per hundred. So that's what we consider revenue neutral with growth factored in. Good.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you.
So the next thing is the budget for FY20 does reflect these new tax rates, and so we are recommending it at a 28-cent rate, which is a 1.87 cents above that revenue neutral number that Ms. Hawk showed a minute ago. So one of the things we did do, and we really pulled this off the county, this is what the county did, and we said, well, let's do the same thing. So what we did is we looked at what is the impact on some of our bills at 28 cents. So 20% of our residential tax bills will decrease. 60% of residential tax bills would increase no more than $10 per month. And then 20% of our residential tax bills would increase more than $10 a month. So we just want to give you that kind of, and here's an example. So if a home value went from $250,000 to $350,000, that's an increase of percent, so this is a pretty good test case, the tax increase would equal less than $8 per month. Now, here's a final point, really to kind of set you guys to thinking. So one of the things that happens with this new tax rate, well, just know what we evaluated was property. Personal property does not get reevaluated. So the personal property, whatever your personal property last year was, it's probably going to go down a little bit by the county's calculations. But in this case, we apply the new tax rate. So a $20,000, if you have a vehicle or personal property worth $20,000, it was assessed at $71 tax from Matthews last year. Under this new proposed tax rate, that same vehicle would be assessed at $56, which is a decrease of $15. So just as a across-the-board issue for the town, that last sentence says, this decreases revenues on the personal property side by $230,000 townwide. All right, Mayor, we could go through the departments. That's where we carved out the $125,000. We could get input from the community, but whatever the pleasure of the board is, because we'll go over each department with this similar format.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and get input from the community. Now, this is a public hearing, so would you anticipate a separate discussion on this at a later point on the agenda or during this public hearing?
Discussion by the board?
Yes.
It really is the pleasure of the board. So right now it is a public hearing. We had anticipated other work sessions. So any feedback the board would give us is helpful to try to finalize the budget. My suggestion would be to open up public comment and then the board can make comments.
Okay. All right. So we are in public hearing at this point on the 2019-2020 budget. If there is anyone who would like to come to the podium and address the board on this particular matter, please come up, state your name and your address for the record, and you can address the Board of Commissioners.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, Town Manager. All of you received an email from me earlier this week or late last week in reference to the budget. The big thing I want to say is thank you to the Town Manager and his staff for putting together an excellent budget, a very responsible budget, one that addresses growth. As we grow, obviously all our services have to grow. And just listening to the idea of putting in more money for paving, you know, our roads take a beating. It's good to do that. I put out there, if your business is growing, you don't decrease your investment in your business. You know, you're not going to sit there and go, well, I don't need to put any money in my business. I'll just let it ride, because then it'll fail. So you got to continue to invest. The thing that really got me irritated reading the Matthews Mint Hill Weekly is the idea that there's a tax increase involved. I know for a fact that when you sit there and say revenue neutral plus some, that's not a tax increase, because I know for a fact that if my values in my home go down, you're not going to lower the tax increase or lower the tax rate to make sure it's revenue neutral. It's always been, okay, we're going to hold it there, and I still pay those taxes. So the big thing I wanted people to understand is, and when I got my Master's of Public Administration, budgeting was one of my favorite things to do. You all did a great job putting together a budget that supports public safety, that supports our town, and dropped the tax rate by 7 cents. That's fabulous. Instead of looking for more places to cut or whittle that back down, I would say, look at places to invest. Did we invest enough in our public safety? Did we invest enough in our roads? Did we invest enough in our services to make sure this town continues to meet the growth that we can't stop, but we can plan for it and make sure it fits the town that I moved into? So again, all I really wanted to say is I felt bad about that idea that there's this report of a tax increase and could get people all worked up, because it's not a tax increase. When I started working at age 16, I worked for Service Merchandise part-time. If we go by that logic, then now that I've been in the workforce for 30 years, and I'm making a heck of a lot more than I did at Service Merchandise, then the federal government should have certainly lowered the tax rate to revenue neutral to what I paid when I was at Service Merchandise. Now, if you want to do that, I'm in. Because last year, they didn't do it, and it hurt. But, again, I just want to say thank you, because I'm sure the town staff doesn't get that enough. Commissioners, thank you for a responsible budget and looking out for our growth. And I wanted to make sure people understood that we are getting a tax decrease from 35.5 to 28 and getting improved services. So thank you very much.
Mr. Sharp, could you state your name and address for the
Oh, I'm
record,
sorry.
please?
Greg Sharp, 3129 Laurelwood Drive, Matthews, North Carolina.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make public comment on the budget? Okay, seeing none, I'll turn back to the manager, and you can continue with your discussion.
Okay, I'll run through this pretty quickly for the publics. So the information, the board has seen this once, but the stuff in red will show that the areas that we found decreases in. So from the last time you guys saw this, so the governing board, we are showing a decrease in, let me get my notes here, just so. So I don't think I'm going to go over all these, but in the board, we did eliminate the contribution to the advisory boards, and they can come back to the board. Commissioner DeMint, that was your idea. I think it's a great idea. They can say, here's what we want to use it for. So that was $3,400. And then we also made a slight decrease to the technology allowance. You guys still have that $3,600 a year, but if you look at historic averages, you guys just have not been using it all, so we just reduced money there. Manager's budget, there was a slight reduction. We had a miscellaneous line item, $750. I would say as a general rule, miscellaneous line items are not good line items because a lot of things could go in there, so we reduced that. Human resources, we found some money in HR pre-employment and our wellness program. Those are minor cuts. Finance, we cut a small amount of money for departmental supplies. And we'll let me just mention that audit does show we're at a 45% fund balance, and then 45% fund balance, and then that 34% is the unassigned. That's free and clear. The board could use that for whatever y'all wish to do. IT, we reduced $500 in supplies. And then risk management, we carved out a little bit of money for, let's see, workers' comp, $3,000, and then $3,000 on property and liability. Police department, we did ask, this is our biggest department, we did ask the chief to carve out about $4,000. He went through, it was tough, but found through a number of line items to find those funds. The good news is all those are the 4 positions that are really going to create a higher level of service to our citizens, and we're going to have 7 new vehicles in the police department. Fire department, Chief Kinneberg worked very hard and cut $31,000. No, excuse me, $18,000 out of his operating budget. We already mentioned the firefighters. We are proposing Idlewild gets a 5% increase. We're doing Charmec alerts, and then we're going to continue with our volunteer incentive program, and there's $80,000 in vehicles for that department. Public Works, this is our 2nd largest department, and we did ask the department to find $31,000 in cuts. CJ did a great job. One of the things he left in there, which I am appreciative of, landscaping, that's probably one of the top priorities in the town, piece of equipment that will help us be more efficient. Some of the things that our folks do are very, very time consuming. If you watch Mario water the plants 6 days a week, That's an example of how time-consuming some of the activities, and particularly in landscaping, can be. And then stormwater, we left flat. That is funded through a fee that's on everybody's tax bills. And then sanitation's the one that went up $175,000. We have no control over that. Planning development, we did cut $4,000 out of that one. Economic development, we found a little bit of money for, professional dues. We cut $1,000 out of that. Program stays the same. Parks and Rec, we asked them to cut about $12,000 out of their budget, which they were able to do. We're doing some things with our multi-use paths and continuing the program of public art. Here's some other things. Levine Senior Center, $5,000. Tourism grants, 83, which is 5% of our tourism estimated revenues for this year. That's a policy you guys put in place last year. $60,000 for Matthews Alive. Sportsplex, that's a $382,000 payment that's out of tourism. This will be our last payment. Arts and Science Council, $25,000. Matthews Historic Foundation, $40,000. That's the museum. It's a lot of value to our community. And then we have a tourism agreement with the chamber, and that's $15,000. Here's some of the things in our capital improvements plan. We got a fire truck for Idlewild, AEDs at the police department. Those are like 3 generations old now. We're going to do an upfit at the Purser Halsey, which includes a gravel parking lot and a dog park. $80,000 for the Sam Newell multi-use path. $22,000 for Pleasant Plains multi-use path. $482,000 for the East Charles Street parking lot. I do know there's a lot of discussion about that. That is currently in the budget. I think staff's recommendation would be to keep that money in there, let the board keep talking about what you want to do with this property. If you guys decide, let's not spend all this money or some of this money, we would recommend keep it in the CIP and let's put it towards paving projects. I know we're behind on paving. And then last thing is $80,000 for public safety enhancements to town facilities. This is our buildings need to be hardened, for lack of a better word. And then the tourism fund's going to continue payments to Sportsplex, Uten Pottery, and the community center roof repairs. There's $265,000 for the Crestdale Heritage Trail, and then $200,000 for the Matthews downtown loop. This segment would be along Matthews Mint Hill Road, extension of where it stops there in front of the hospital. So that's the presentation. We're happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions for the manager? Mr. Higgin?
Hazen, you mentioned that there's going to be almost a $400,000 windfall in additional sales tax revenue. Where's that money going?
So that in this fiscal year, you're talking about this fiscal year or next fiscal year?
This fiscal year.
In this current fiscal year. So that's embedded in that $370,000 that we're projecting revenues over the budget. So that would go into the fund balance. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but it could conceivably be used to offset some of this tax increase.
So, okay, so that is a good question. So I think one of the things I am worried about is that the operating budget, that's annual, that's year in, year out, that's money in the operating budget. The tax increase, as a good example, like the $482,000, that is over there in the CIP. Those should be used for one-time things like paving. Then you go on, you keep the money in there, you go on to the next paving project if you wanted to do that. So this budget does show about $719,000 of general fund money into the CIP that we need to keep there, because there's a lot of things. Next year it's $900,000 in the CIP, and the year after that it's $1 million in the CIP. So it's really going to be a never-ending, for the town to be great, there's a lot of things that we want to do. We got to have money into that capital improvements plan to really continue all the progress the town's made in the last 30 years.
Mr. Query?
And mine's a question, and maybe Charlie be a part of this, but the money we have for the paving the parking lot, could we use the hotel motel taxes for that, since it's for service to visitors?
eligible as a tourism-related program. Sorry, that would not be eligible as a tourism-related program expenditure.
Okay,
That's just simply a capital cost.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Melton?
Thank you, Mayor. Question for the manager. Right now, we've adopted a policy that sets our unassigned fund balance at 34%. Right now, as I understand it, we're at 34.5%. As a part of this budget or the budget discussion, would you recommend, or what would your thoughts be on us revising that policy to say we cap it at 34% instead of that being a goal, and taking the monies extra, that 0.5% that we sit at right now, and transferring that to a paving budget?
It's a great question. So that half a percent represents about $110,000. The fund balance can fluctuate from year to year. My recommendation would be wait until we get we end this year, June 30th, and then we'll have an audit which would be completed, let's say in October. And in October, you'll see, okay, what's the undesignated fund balance? Hopefully something higher than that 34%. And then you guys could figure out, or like, what's that range gonna be? You know, how much do you wanna take? But I think the danger is realizing that is one-time dollars, and we should not put those into reoccurring costs that are just gonna be eaten up. So, but I think it's a good idea to examine that in probably November of 2019.
Thank you.
Mr. Mint?
We have a little bit lower than the average in our unassigned and assigned budget. But what was it, 54% or 55% average? How much of that average is unassigned? Because we have a healthy
Yeah.
unassigned percentage, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration too.
Yeah, so the state of North Carolina, to its credit, highly regulates towns' finances, and so we have to every year send stuff to the state of North Carolina, and they print it up on a website, and all that is easy to digest, all access. And when we see it, when the auditor comes, our auditor says, here's your fund balance, let's say 47%, and then our auditor also says, here's the unassigned. Because in that 45 could be PAL bill funds that you have to use for street, it could be stormwater stuff that you have to use for stormwater things. The problem is that the state of North Carolina does not divide out what's unassigned. All they show is this, so somebody may have a 60%, but we don't know what it's made up of. So I don't know why they do that, because that's really the critical question, is what's unassigned.
Right.
And you guys have done a good job of focusing on that instead of getting all caught up on a bigger number that's really not free money.
Mr. Query?
Another question. Hazen, have y'all done some thought on what we really need to get our roads up to par? Is that we need to have a bond election so we can spread that get them up to par, and then spread that money out over a long period of time? And what effect would that have if we take those funds you've got now and change that into a bond election?
So it is a good question. I think about it at the planning conference. We do that every year. That's a great opportunity. You know, we talked about multi-use pass at the planning conference. We talked about road construction like Ames Street or West Charles Street, or extending Andrew Caroline Road. You know, we've even talked about extending Greylock Ridge Road. That would be a very expensive project. We talked about the gaps in sidewalks as an example. We talked about paving. So there's, and you guys had some very high priorities that at the end of the day were going to be very expensive, and we have not done a bond referendum since 2004. So I do think it's the right thing to do would be to decide what you want to do, put it on a bond referendum, but I do not think you should substitute the fund balance or the tax rate for that matter, because you know, a couple months ago, we talked about the improvements to 74 and widen those bridges to make sure they're pedestrian friendly, and that was over a $5 million cost. So there's some very big ticket items that may be 5 years away, but we need to start saving money now so that hopefully we can afford it in our fund balance for these one-time costs, as opposed to being in a crisis and having to raise taxes, you know, I don't know, 3 cents because we don't have enough money. I'd much rather see us start the plan now. So from a staff perspective, that's what we're doing, is watching. Hopefully this fund balance will grow. We can carve off some of this. My suggestion would be put it into a capital reserve account and know, okay, this is going to go for roads or paving or improvements to Greenway. And besides all that, you may still want to do a bond referendum.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we are still in public hearing, so since we've gathered more information, if anybody is still just gnawing away and wants to stand up and speak, you're more than happy to come up to the podium and address the board. I knew I'd get you up, Larry.
My name's Larry Lester. I live at 1335 Seamus Drive in Matthews. One of the things that I'm hearing about here is long-range planning. I had the opportunity and privilege to sit on the East John Street Widening Project Committee. And one of the things that we've talked about is let's let these projects that we have build out and then see what the traffic situation looks like. And part of that may be that we have to spend some of our own money to do what we want with East John Street. So I think if we have an opportunity to save a few dollars for future projects, it's always easy to spend money. It's very difficult to save it. If we have opportunities to save that money, I think it's very important that we save that money for that project that we're all so passionate about making our town more livable. So this is a real opportunity for us to take that long-range look, try to anticipate what might be going on, and continue to save our money for that type of a project, which is going to be not necessarily a one-time project, but there will be an initial huge investment there if we have to make it. So those are my recommendations to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on to the next item, item 10B. We are still in public hearing, and this is a historic designation of property, the property known as B.A. Sestair House, including the exterior of the building and the land listed under tax parcel number 193-27114 in the Mecklenburg County Tax Office, Charlotte, North Carolina, as of April 1, 2019. Said property is owned by Yeager Beats LLC and is located at 110 West Matthews Street. Mr. Morrow, how are you, sir?
Mr. Mayor, Board of Commissioners, I'm Dan Morrow, the Director of the Historic Landmarks Commission. It's always a pleasure to come to Matthews. I did want to say that this house and this property was brought to our attention as far as recommending it for designation by your local Historic Preservation Advisory Committee. You are very fortunate to have someone like Paula Lester, who is a former chair of the Historic Landmarks Commission, to be such a devoted advocate for local history, as many others are too. And so that's really what started us on this path. The fundamental job of the Historic Landmarks Commission is to study properties to see if they have the requisite special significance to warrant the most powerful tool of local control of historic resources, except owning them outright, and that is designating them as an historic landmark. That will give the town special regulatory powers over changes to the property, and also the opportunity to try to prevent its demolition in the future. In our judgment, it is clear that the Barnum Sestar House does indeed warrant local historic landmark designation, essentially on two grounds, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but the two grounds are: first, it is an artifact. It's an artifact of the development of Matthews. The Sestar family was ravaged by the Civil War. They came to Mecklenburg County in the New Harmony community, two twin brothers with big, long beards, and became very prosperous cotton farmers. In fact, both the brothers' homes are still extant today. The railroad, of course, was important, and it was significant for the development of Matthews. And Barnum Sustar, who was an adroit, skillful businessman, recognized the opportunities that would come if he moved to Matthews, which he did about 1915, when there were 300 residents approximately in town. He knew that there was something about to happen. Even though you had the railroad, the thing that really transformed towns like Matthews was the advent of the automobile. When Henry Ford started producing the Model T in 1908 and produced a car that would be for the masses, that became a major transforming event. Paved highways became a necessity. In 1921, a paved highway, which we now call Monroe Road in Charlotte, came to Matthews. You were really connected for the first time. Before that, you had a spoke of muddy dirt roads that went out of town that really could lead you nowhere except to the local train station. Barnum Sustar understood that one of the things that provided was the opportunity for recreational tourism. And so Barnum Sustar, who was already a wealthy man when he came to Matthews, and that's why he was able to build such a magnificent house in 1919. As many of you know here, in 1922 he built the largest swimming pool available for public use at the time in all of Mecklenburg County. My wife's grandfather grew up on the Matthews-Weddington Road, and he was a man who understood Matthews, and I heard all kinds of stories from my wife, from her father, from her uncles about going to the Sustar swimming pool. It was a big deal. And there were these wonderful occasions of all these picnics when they'd bring, Sustar understood he would invite twins, identical twins, from all over the region to come and spend a special day at the Sustar swimming pool. So it has associative history. It's an artifact of the development of Matthews. The other reason for its special significance is its architecture. You know, it's interesting when you contrast, say, the Nancy Reed House with the Barnum Sustar House. The Nancy Reed House is a celebration of industrialization. It's got all kinds of filigree and all kinds of decorative detail. The Craftsman Bungalow, which started to catch on in the 19-teens, was a rebellion against Victorianism. It was basically making things much simpler, using, if you will, to celebrate craftsmanship as over against mechanical ornamentation. And there's no question about the fact that this is one of the most imposing, substantial examples of the Craftsman Bungalow style of architecture, not only in Matthews, but I would say that it is really one of the finest examples in all of Mecklenburg County. So on both grounds, both because of its associative history and because of its architectural significance, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Historic Landmarks Commission is very certain that it meets special significance and thereby recommends the designation of the exterior of the house and the grounds. The reason the interior of the house is not designated is because state law requires owner consent. All of my interactions with the owner, which have been very cordial, it's adaptive reuse, I believe she understands, and I believe that she supports this designation, although I haven't gotten any specific written evidence of that.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Morrow? Okay. Thank you very much.
Bless you all.
Certainly appreciate your time. So is there anyone who would like to speak to the historic designation of the B.A. Sustar House? Okay?
I wasn't actually going to do this, but I.
But you need to.
I did speak with the owner. I'm Paula Lester at 1335 Seamus Drive, Matthews, North Carolina. And I actually thought she was planning to be here because she had called me and asked if I would come tonight. And I said, well, sure, because this is a project that's near and dear to my heart. Matthews has lost a lot of wonderful houses over the years. We, in my opinion, cannot afford to lose any more. This is a marvelous example of craftsman-style bungalow, and would be such a shame when I look at that corner that I wouldn't see that house there anymore. So I think we have to do all that we can to protect what we have left. But I'm surprised Jane's not here, but she was in favor of this. I've talked to her at the salon, I've talked to her on the phone, and I did not, I was out of town, so I have not called her since I came to town, back to town, but I know she would be very happy. She does not want anything to happen to her house either. She loves the house. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the historic designation of this home? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to reconvene the regular meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, items A through D. Do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda, items 12A through 12D. 2.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 13, unfinished business. Item 13A is zoning application 2018-691 Boyd Funderburg Drive. If you'll remember, this was an application that we had the public hearing on and was up for decision 2 weeks ago. The individuals were in Stallings, dealing with another portion of this same development that was under the ordinance of Stallings. And unfortunately, they went on till 11 or 11:30 that evening and were not able to get here to speak to us prior to approval. So we defer this for 2 weeks. Staff has provided a memo with the document. And I guess at this point, do we have a motion to approve or deny this zoning application? Mr. Urban?
I'll let the quiet. I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve zoning application 2018-691. The requested zoning action is most currently amended as approved and has been found to be consistent with the Matthews Land Use Plan. It is consistent by allowing an RVS development combined with a small commercial component to be located in an area with convenient interstate access and within walking distance to shops and amenities. And it is reasonable because the rezoning creates new housing opportunities at moderate densities in an area that is within convenient walking or biking distance to numerous amenities, including current grocery store, pharmacy, and restaurants. The development, this is most important, provides a seamless street network envisioned in the land use plan that connects Matthews and Stallings.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Do we have any discussion or questions for the petitioner? I would like to ask the petitioner to come up and provide any input or concerns relative to the Stallings approval that might impact this portion of the development.
Good evening. Todd Akers, 1019 Dacman Drive, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28226. Good evening, Mayor Bailey and Commissioners. Thank you for patiently waiting for us. The approval was 4-1 in Stallings. comments from the opposed were mainly that there was, the process was too fast, the individual thought, and also because they had not ever approved apartments in the past, and this was the first project to ever get approved for apartments. And that was pretty much it.
Okay, and for clarity, there are no apartments in the section that are in Matthews?
No, sir, not in this area.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no discussion, all those in favor of zoning petition 2018-691, raise your hand.
Well, you got a motion to include reasonable, well, he said that.
Yeah,
He's
we're
already
done all
did
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay, anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously.
sorry about that.
That's all right. All right, next agenda item is new business. 14A, receive information from NCDOT regarding Project U-5007, North Carolina 51 widening. That's the Matthews Mint Hill Road to Lawyers Road. Good
Thank you,
morning.
Mr. Mayor and Board of Commissioners.
Good morning. No, good evening.
When we wait long enough, it will be morning again. My name is Scott Cole. I'm the Division Engineer for the North Carolina Department of Transportation for this 5-county area that includes Mecklenburg County. And one of the projects that we are working to deliver is the widening of NC 51, as you can see from the Matthews Township Parkway / Old Matthews Mint Hill Road over to Lawyers Road in Mint Hill. And I'm just here to kind of introduce and kick that off and turn it over to Travis Pressler, one of our project managers, to talk about where we are, what we have considered to date, and what we recommend going forward.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. So I want to speak a little bit about project overview, proposed typical sections on the project, alternatives considered in our traffic analysis, the recommended facility, detailed alternatives comparisons at the various intersections, and schedule and next steps. So the project will widen NC 51 to a 4-lane median divided facility from existing Matthews Township Parkway, where old 51 used to cut over to Butler High School, all the way to Lawyers Road in Mint Hill. The purpose is to reduce congestion and improve capacity as traffic volumes grow over the next couple of decades. We're required to go through environmental review in accordance with the state law, and a state environmental assessment EA is being prepared to evaluate the potential impacts of the project. So the Matthews typical section is 4-lane, median divided, predominantly grass median, 11-foot lanes with a sidewalk on the 5-foot sidewalk on the west side and a 10-foot multi-use path on the east side. As I go through this presentation, NC 51 is a north-south route, so as you travel from Matthews to Mint Hill, you'll be traveling north. It's easy for me to confuse that, so I thought I would say that. Mint Hill is similar typical section all the way from Idlewild Road to Robin Hollow, and then you get into their core downtown area from Robin Hollow to Lawyers Road, and it changes a little bit to 8-foot sidewalks on both sides. Alternatives considered. So, like I've said, the proposed facility is a 4-lane median divided, and alternative intersection treatments were evaluated for the major intersections, including roundabouts, traditional full movement signalized intersections, reduced conflict intersections, and median U-turn intersection at Idlewild Road. The remaining roadways, and side roads are proposed as right in, right out with stop sign control. So what is a reduced conflict intersection? It's an intersection that kind of reconfigures some of the side street movements to spread things out, and it's an intersection design that you may have heard of called Super Street in the past. So the name has been changed to Reduced Conflict Intersection, or RCI, you'll hear me refer to it as, to better communicate the source of its safety benefits, the source of that being to reduce conflicts. And also, we had lots of confusion from folks confusing super street with super fast, and that's clearly not what we're out to accomplish with this. A conventional full movement intersection has 32 conflict points, and these RCIs have 14. This is a depiction of a conventional intersection. You can see that the crossing, there's a cluster of what we call crossing conflict points, and a conflict point is anywhere where two vehicle paths cross. You obviously have a potential for an impact there. And the crossing conflict points are usually the more dangerous. RCI, you have reduced conflict points to 14, and it looks like our crossing conflict points is reduced to 2. Signal phasing is another advantage of these RCIs. We get a much more efficient system that helps all users. These are two-phase signals now that we've kind of spread things out and moved things out away from a few of the movements away from the main intersection. So you get more green time for the through street movement and oftentimes for the side street movement as well. You can also get shorter cycle lengths. Reduces delay for most vehicles and for pedestrians. Can have different cycle lengths for each direction of the major street because they kind of operate as two one-way pairs, kind of like a downtown area. And they can also function with high capacity side street volumes up in excess of 20,000 vehicles per day. Here is an illustration of the amount of green time. If you were to approach an intersection, a traditional full movement intersection on red, you would have to sit through many other phases where folks had green and you have red. And this is your green, this is all the other movements red. Well, with an RCI, it has, this is a depiction of what could happen. You may see a reduction in this total cycle length as well, but there's more green for each individual movement because you're only sharing movement with one other person. It's just me and you going at that intersection. So I get more green, I get a bigger slice of the pie, but also I have to wait less because all I'm having to wait on is you while I'm red. So, and this is what they look like. You can see that the left turns and the throughs are kind of reconfigured, so where you make a right and go down here and make a U-turn to come back through and make your original movement. The main street movements are all the same. Lefts, rights, throughs, they're all the same. And you also get the added benefit of a couple of additional pedestrian crossing opportunities at an RCI. So if this was a residential area or a entertainment area or commercial area, you would have additional opportunities for folks to cross the street as opposed to coming all the way down here to the main street and then crossing and going back. So what that results in is reduced likelihood of crashes, especially severe crashes, 15% reduction in crashes at signalized RCIs versus signalized traditional intersections. That's from the Federal Highway in 2017. 46% reduction in crashes at unsignalized RCIs versus unsignalized conventional intersections. That's from NC State in 2010. Fewer threats to crossing pedestrians due to typically fewer lanes to cross per stage and typically larger refuges. 20% travel time savings on a signalized RCI corridor compared to a conventional corridor with traffic signals, and that's also from an NC State study in 2010. So the alternatives considered roundabouts. We looked at roundabouts at Phillips, Idlewild, and Lebanon, and unfortunately none of the roundabout locations performed at acceptable levels of service with the projected traffic volumes in the design year of 2045. We looked at traditional signalized intersections at Matthews Mint Hill Road, Matthews Township Parkway, Phillips, Idlewild, Lebanon, Phyllis, Brighton Park, and Lawyers. You see the three blue at the top, those are the ones in Matthews. We also looked at RCIs, reduced conflict intersections at Cena, Matthews Mint Hill, Matthews Township, Phillips, Idlewild, and the rest of the same in Mint Hill. We also looked at a median U-turn, which is another variant of a reduced conflict where you allow the through movements on all approaches to go. So folks can go straight from any direction, but all of the left turns are reconfigured to the conveniently located U-turn bulb. So our recommended facility is reduce conflict intersections from Cena Drive all the way to Phyllis Lane, and then traditional intersections at the remaining two, Brighton Park Drive and Lawyers Road in the core downtown of Mint Hill. And also, we're going to add a leftover intersection at Evans Road and Library Driveway. That's also in downtown Mint Hill between those other two intersections. So in terms of a detailed comparison of the intersections, so right here we have tables. These are our level of service tables, and a level of service is a measure of delay, overall delay and individual delay for each person sitting at the intersection, whether they're taking a left or a right or a through. It's A through F grading. It's not like we were when we were in school. It's not what it's like. It's just a measure of delay. But A is good and F is not near as good. In fact, it's bad. So, and these charts, when you look at these charts, you'll see green and yellow. And yellow is a D. That's a level of service D. And we consider a level of service D overall for the intersection acceptable in the design year, in this case 2045. So we consider that an acceptable level of service. And you'll see later some oranges and reds. Those are E's and F's. Those are unacceptable for an overall level of service. But you will find individual movements with E's and F's, even if you have an overall level of service that is acceptable. So this is Cena Drive, and our preferred alternative here is the RCI, which is the reduced conflict intersection. And you can see lots of A's, lots of green. So this operates pretty well. This is the traditional full movement signalized intersection alternative. You can see it still operates overall acceptably with B's and C's, but you've got lots of oranges and lots of yellows. Individual movements are failing. So our recommended alternative for operations and safety benefits is an RCI at this intersection. Mint Hill Road, Matthews Mint Hill Road at Matthews Township Parkway. This is where it goes off to Butler High School. Again, you can see B's, lots of green, only a couple of oranges, which are E's for a couple of the approaches. So this alternative also has less widening at the side street. We can keep it at 4 lanes versus widening to 5 lanes at the other alternative that we'll see. And the impacts don't go as far back, as you'll see in a moment. And also it maintains this Kimway Drive access as it exists today. Overall, this is less impacts, better level of service, and a safer intersection alternative. The traditional is what we also looked at. You can see this is still an acceptable level of service in the design year. I think that says C and a D. But overall, you have many more failing levels of service of individual approaches, and also your impacts are greater here. You've got 5 lanes, so that's more widening that you have to do, and you have to carry the widening further back, about 1,100 feet back into that roadway. So less impacts, better level of service, and safer alternative. That's why we would recommend the RCI. Phillips, again, we're preferring or recommending the RCI. You can see lots of A's. I think those are a C and an A B and a B. So good level of service, only a couple of E's for this alternative. Only 3 lanes on the side street, which is what you have today, only 2 lanes on this side street, so very minimal widening compared to the full movement. So again, similar thing, better overall level of service, and you also get more pedestrian crossing opportunities with the addition of the U-turn bulbs. This is the Phillips Road at the traditional full movement signal. Again, in the design year, an acceptable level of service, but you get many more individual movements that have failing levels of service. It's the oranges and the reds. And you also have to do additional widening here and here to accommodate additional lanes. Ottawa Road, our preferred alternative is again a reduced conflict intersection. So you can see lots of green, a D, a yellow, a D. That's still an acceptable level of service in the design year. Lots of greens. I think those are C's, B's, and C's. Very few oranges or reds. And this is, you also get the additional pedestrian crossing opportunities at U-turn bulbs. This is the fewest amount of lanes needed on the Idlewild approaches of any of the alternatives that we looked at. And it has the least amount of property impacts overall to the adjacent business and parcels. So again, impacts are less, performance is better, safety is better than what we looked at. Two different alternatives here. This is a median U-turn, and it may not be apparent, but on this alternative, Idlewild Road can go straight through in both directions, and so can 51. And all of the left turns here are reconfigured to these nearly placed U-turn bulbs. So a little bit different, whereas this Michigan alternative allows throughs in all directions. But again, this is still good performance. C's, B's, C's, lots of green, very little bit of yellow and orange. But more impacts than the RCI we just looked at. So you've got impacts into this parking and impacts it most likely into this parking. More impacts to this northeast quadrant, which is today, I believe, undeveloped, but I think there's a plan for that. And then the traditional full movement at Idlewild Road, lots of impact, still an acceptable level of service in the design year, D&D, we consider that acceptable in 2045. Lots of, however, you've got lots of oranges and reds, lots of E's and S, failing levels of service for the various different approaches. And then, of course, you've got lots of widening, lots of impacts, dual throughs, even on Idlewild, dual lefts on all approaches, a couple of right turns. You even have a dual right-hand turn lane here. So impacts to parking here, and then significant impacts, or the most significant impacts to this northeast quadrant here. So again, that's a similar thing. The RCI is our preferred alternative for this intersection. And as you continue through Mint Hill, I won't bore you with that, but it's a similar story. Less impacts to private property, better levels of service for the intersections, and a safer alternative statistically until you get to the core of Mint Hill, where these two intersections, Brighton Park and Lawyers Road, we are recommending a traditional, and that's simply because the impacts of these U-turn bulbs are greater in this area than other parts of the project because of this densely developed area really close to the existing right-of-way. So our recommended facility, again, is reduce conflict intersections from Cena Drive to Phyllis Lane. And then in the core of Mint Hill, we will be doing or recommending the traditional full movement intersections at Brighton Park and Lawyers Road. Benefits to the corridor are increased capacity and safety, and for the RCI at various locations, you have additional pedestrian crossing opportunities. Next steps, our local officials in public meeting later this summer. Our environmental document, the state EA FONSI, will be in the fall of this year, and we will begin final design this summer, right-of-way acquisition next year, and construction in the fall of 2022. So if you really want to get into the weeds, I can pull up the maps and we can zoom in and look at any kind of individual intersection that you like, lane configurations, things of that nature. I tried to make it as palatable as possible for you. There was a lot of information to take in, but certainly be willing to get into the details if you need. Yes, sir.
Mr. Hagan.
I wish you were around when I was a kid to explain to my father that a D was an acceptable grade. So he didn't buy that to me. Also, I think it's kind of interesting that we're now calling super streets RCIs. That's a lot of disdain for super streets, so kind of rename it. That's the one question I have is, what is the worst case impact to the neighborhoods there? They're going to have to turn right. How far will they have to drive to do a U-turn if they're headed in the opposite direction?
Well, typically we like these U-turn bulbs to be around, I mean, they can vary, right? Because we're trying to put them in a place where it has the least amount of impacts. So 600 to 1,500 feet is not uncommon, right? So,
well, that's not too bad.
No, I would not consider that too bad. I mean, most of these U-turn bulbs, when you pull out to the main street, unless there's lots of grade issues, you're going to be able to see the place where you're turning. I mean, it's that close, you can see it, right? So an example of that would be Idlewild Road. This is Idlewild Road. This is the Food Lion. I think there's a new church here, and this is our U-turn opportunity. So this is, these two are maybe on the, 1,200 foot side. I don't have it measured out, but they're kind of on a little bit of the high side. But again, I would not consider those very far.
There's no place where somebody's got to drive a mile or something like that.
No, sir. No, sir.
That's not nearly bad. And could you explain again the difference in the capacity of a RCI compared to a roundabout? You said the roundabout doesn't have the capacity?
Right. The roundabouts do not have the capacity that this and some other designs do. I mean, roundabouts work well in particular locations with particular traffic volumes, but in our study of this corridor with these traffic volumes projected to 2045 with our forecast, the roundabouts did not work, but these did work. So
let me add to that if I may, Travis. Roundabouts typically work well with balanced traffic volumes up to a point, and then they become overloaded. Because a roundabout or a conventional intersection, everybody is jockeying for that little piece of real estate right there at the main intersection. That's where you run into a problem. And this kind of distributes that load somewhat to the main intersection and the U-turn points, and helps to distribute that and function better by moving some of the movements, relocating some of the movements to more outlying areas.
Well, my main concern was the long distance for a U-turn, and I think what you said is fairly reasonable, so thank you.
Mr. Query.
Yes. 2 or 3 years ago, we were told the roundabout at Idlewild was the right thing to do, and now we're fixing to put that under construction again for another 6 months. Why was this not considered at that time? And the other thing is we were been considering with Met Hill how to decorate that roundabout. So I reckon we need to take that off the books then. So,
well, I know that's the next. In speaking with Hazen before the meeting, I recognize that's the next point of discussion for the board. I'll say that when we anticipated building the roundabout, when we moved forward with that project, we had an entirely different method and means of prioritizing our projects overall. And at that time, funding was equitably distributed across the state, meaning that the areas with low growth and relatively low population on the east end and the west end of our state were getting just as much funding as the very populous and very high demand areas around our urban areas. And so that has changed dramatically. In addition, we typically design roundabouts for a 10-year design period. And so by the time this project matures and comes into construction and is fully constructed, I think we'll achieve very close to that 10-year design period. What we're designing for here in these larger projects is typically a 20-year design period. Okay, and you heard Travis talk about 2045. So what we're trying to design and build here is something that will be a lasting improvement. Certainly the roundabout is serving its purpose well now and will serve its purpose for the short term. But when we start looking at the growth anticipated for the Matthews and Mint Hill areas, we need to accommodate that growth with the
okay. On top of that, let me ask you, what is the consideration about widening Idlewild now to 485? Is that being considered?
So it has not been submitted by the MPO for prioritization, to my knowledge. They have submitted a piece of Idlewild from 485 down to Stevens Mill Road. That's the Stallings piece, which y'all were talking about development that's being considered in that area. But not for that piece between 51 and 485 at this point.
Okay, and my concern was, as you saw, we just approved a small portion of a big development going in, which most of it is in Stallings.
Right.
Which is going to really increase the traffic flow on Idlewild, and I'm wondering what that's gonna do to your plans already.
Right. So there'll be some impacts here. Of course, we designed these for existing land uses, so if that's a more dense land use, it could potentially provide impacts here, but more likely, and we've already kind of included it with that piece that we're working to design in the Stallings area, because Stallings made us aware of their small area plan that included some of that highly dense development.
So Matthews needs to come back to you with, or Matthews Mill combined needs to come back to you with something on the rest of Idlewild.
If you have significant plans for densification, then yes. If you anticipate your land use plan largely remaining as it is, then we've got that accounted for.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Urban?
I guess just a couple things is, one from our side of the fence is, I'd like to know what our actual accident issues are along that road. I mean, because this reduces accidents on 9 yards, and it really is a very tight road, doesn't have a lot of signals on it. I think the roundabout's done an excellent job, so I'd really be curious what's going on there. To your side of the point, I'd like to know how you affect our Halsey Purser Park, because it looks like you've got a loon within 50 or 100 feet of the entrance to the park.
I think it's right here.
And it's
Somewhere
just
around
past Phillips.
Oh,
It's just.
right, Phillips is over here.
Yeah, the park is just past Phillips.
Okay.
That's it.
So that,
Yeah, there you go.
yeah, that loon
So it's, yeah.
is right about where that loon is.
So you're saying the entrance to the park is here?
You see, yeah, right, yes. Short answer, yes. And I guess my own personal experience with this road system is, and I get it, moves more traffic. I think it's gonna be a bigger conversation with us about how it's gonna bisect the town in some regards, in the way there's so much single family along that corridor. I mean, we had these rezoning petitions, and the board says, we've emphatic about keeping this residential along here. In looking at this, I'm sitting, wow, that's not a good move. It would have been better to maybe have some kind of buffer type of development, because that's gonna increase the level of traffic, obviously, and the noise. But you've done a wonderful job of making me avoid these type of roads. You've got one on Wesley Chapel Stouts Road on 74. I made a mistake of doing it twice. The first time I was like, okay, I'll try it. I'm thinking of Scott Cole. I'm turning right, going up to that. Second time, I'm like, why did I even do this? So I now actually go the long way around to avoid it. I'd rather have a traditional light, to be honest with you. I've never been so frustrated in my life, and I think the passenger with me thought I was gonna just beat them to death after having executed this thing. I'm sorry, I'm just not built for these.
I'm sorry you had that experience. But I will say that please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because that route, and we've had struggles with getting that project complete, but it is still very much under construction, and not in its final pattern and everything complete and fully operational. So there is some frustration, I know, on the motorist's part, certainly on our part still with that project. I will say too that is one of the benefits of this design. Number one, if we have strictly residential, then these are shown as worst case scenario to accommodate the largest tractor trailer that is on our roadways today, and can be reduced dramatically to just accommodate a school bus, right? In addition to that, because we don't have to put everything right here at the main intersection, we can very easily slide these to an open spot that better serves the adjacent land use and provides as little disturbance as possible to the park and other areas.
Well, I guess my follow-up question would be is, how much, I mean, this is paralleling 485, and the whole time we're talking about John Street and getting people around. How much traffic is 485 handling in that quadrant? And are you handling almost a similar amount?
No.
Or
So, I don't have the exact volumes here. I'd say the current 485 probably handles 60 to 80,000 cars a day. And in this design year, probably 50% over that. I'm not sure what the volumes are here, but I would venture in the 40 to 50 range.
All right, and then one last question is, the medians you're showing, I'm seeing a cross-section of just concrete, and you mentioned something about grass. We're not seriously just talking about 16 feet of concrete across there, are we?
No. So we will do our best, without spreading the road farther apart, impacting the adjacent properties more, to put a small grassy median in the middle. But in areas where we can, we will certainly intend to grass that median.
I mean, it's still running through Mint Hill and Matthews. It's still part of our community. It's not connecting point A to point B because we're actually melded. And I kind of think of the 51 bypass through here. It's got the crepe myrtles in it. It's landscaped. The median's pretty wide. It's a fairly pleasant driving experience. And I guess I just have to just deal with these loons on there aspect of it. But I just can't imagine, swinging around that bend, getting past Bellicera, and all of a sudden turning it into a concrete jungle, all the way out to Mint Hill. I'm just not sure that is not the image that I see for either one of our towns.
Agreed. And we can certainly work with the towns through those issues and try to minimize those types of impacts and keep as much green as possible within the project.
Okay.
Scott, let me ask you about this intersection relative to the Monroe Road 51 intersection, where we're putting the CFI, or the CFI is proposed for that. Why wouldn't this type of intersection work up at 51 if you were simply just trying to get people, or at 51 in Monroe, if you were trying to get people to circumnavigate back and forth in lieu of trying to make them go up Monroe Road? I guess when we look at John Street and that whole strategy and thought process,
right,
in coming through, I think the general interest is not to have that road as a through road. And
right.
So we'd like to encourage people to get onto 485. So instead of a CFI, could something like this be done at 51 of Monroe Road?
So you need to understand the context, right? When you look at Phillips Road and the subdivision road across from it, those volumes are really relatively low compared to the volumes on 51, even the turning movements that you see there today. Whereas at Monroe and 51, through volumes are very much higher. Left turning volumes are, I think, like 800 vehicles an hour in the peak hour. I mean, just extremely high from our perspective. And so we're looking there at more like a six laning, and then even this design doesn't work. You get to the point at those two intersections where you're talking about an interchange. If you look at the alternatives that will function from a traffic operation standpoint. So that's why we end up with the CFI. Now, the town has asked us to go back and look at quadrant roadways as another alternative, and we have evaluated that, and we just had an internal meeting to kind of discuss what we found, what the initial results of that evaluation were, and are preparing to come back to town staff and then present to the board as to what our findings were. I think you'll be pleased with it. Actually, the quadrant roadway didn't gain a lot of ground for us and had a lot higher cost because of the impacts associated with the quadrant roadways.
Mm-hmm.
But we did end up with a more refined design that I think helps with what you're talking about as far as directing or emphasizing traffic entering into the central business district area of the town from that intersection.
Okay, so even if as we progress down this road, and I don't want to get, too far ahead here, but, the concept is that John Street not be, a large traffic 4-lane road. So, but even with through traffic coming up to 51, your belief is that there's going to be enough to justify that modified intersection there?
Yes.
Okay,
I think, unfortunately, that we're almost to that point today.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'll ask one more question.
Mr. Query?
What is the date you anticipate making a change from the roundabout at Idle? And I live near Idlewild, that's why I'm asking those questions, because I know I'm going to get questions. Because our next item on the agenda is for decorating that roundabout.
So what we've got on the schedule is construction in fall of '22. Okay, so that's
2022.
right. So that's three plus years from today. I will say, looking at this schedule, this is very aggressive because you see right-of-way acquisition in 2020, and even though that's spring of 2020, and this is we're talking about construction fall of 2022. This is a very lengthy project. We'll have hundreds of parcels that will be touched for right-of-way acquisition. And then part of the right-of-way acquisition, part of that time frame is also utility relocation. So all the poles, all the underground lines, data, gas, electric, the overhead electric lines, water, sewer, all of that will have to be coordinated with the utility companies and accommodated during this reconstruction process. So really,
2022 is not realistic.
It's a goal, but unlikely that we'd meet that. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you wanted to add? Okay. Okay, the next item, 14B, is discuss a welcome to Matthews sign at the Idlewild Road roundabout. Mr. Manager.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the board, we always appreciate when DOT comes to talk to us. We've been talking about this sign for a couple of years now. I know Susan and, thank you. I know that Susan and our folks have been working hard really to get the sign approved through DOT. And we did get it approved, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, a couple months ago. And it's about the same time we heard about this issue of the roundabout. I mean, from my perspective, the roundabout works lovely right now. And to have that Welcome to Matthews sign on our side and Welcome to Mint Hill on their side, I thought we were very excited about it. I thought the design was great. I think the question that we thought, well, we need to talk to the board about it is what's the payback period, right? If we said, let's do it, and listen to Scott talk, maybe there's another 5 years, maybe it's longer. I think the other thing, Scott, you mentioned to me, when you start construction, you don't like just go to the roundabout, like tear out the roundabout, right? It gets, everything gets staged. So my guess is it's reasonable that this sign would be up for the next 5 to 7 years. We use tourism funds for it. I do think it would be a beautiful sign for that time period. I just wanted to let the board know someday it's going to come down, and we don't want the board to be surprised. So I would recommend we push forward. We put the sign up. And enjoy it for a limited time.
Mr. Higdon.
Unless the sign is reconfigurable and we can use it somewhere else, I wouldn't spend one dime on it. If we're never going to be tearing it down in even 5 years, that's a waste of money. Unless we can use it elsewhere, or I would not be in favor of spending money on it, even tourism funds.
That's a reasonable perspective.
Is it reusable? Okay. Mr. Urban?
The only way I see it being reusable is you redesign it, and it's a precast panel with a brick inlay or something like that, and it's set, and we lift it out and move it to another location some other day and have to sort of rethink that one. But I just feel silly because people are going to say, where's the sign? We're going to put it up, and then 2 years later, all this road work's going to go. I know it's not this board's fault, and no one else knew about this road project, but it just seems like I got egg on my face tonight about this whole conversation, but you could make a temporary sign. I think you could do more with landscaping, which we all expect could make beautification from that aspect of it, but I'm in Commissioner Higdon's court there, that make it pretty, do something temporary, but don't, I think people would just laugh at us.
Mr. Melton?
Thank you, Mayor. Hazen, if we started tomorrow, what is the anticipated completion date for the sign? How long of a project is it?
6 months?
I think that's a great question. We do have interested contractors, so it all depends on the bidding process and everything. So I would think less than 6 months. Ideally, I mean, the town engineer from Mid Hill and I have been working hard on this to try and get approval from NCDOT to do it, and we have bid packages ready to go, and then we get this news and we go, all right, let's just hold off. So, I mean, we're ready to put this on the street whenever, so I would think 4 months max.
So is it 4 months until construction begins, or 4 months from tonight?
I think it's only a 2-month build out, so it would be 2 month get the bids and 2 month build out, because it's a fairly simple structure.
Yeah.
It's just some concrete and rebar with brick over top of it, and then the landscaping to come in the fall.
I'm in the camp of the Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioner Urban. I was looking forward to it, and now I don't see spending the money on it. How much is the sign, Sue? Estimate?
I don't remember our last estimate. I'm sorry, I don't remember. CJ has it because he always has his computer on him.
This is going off memory.
Oh.
I think it was combined budget of around $100,000, splitting it with Mid Hill.
So my suggestion, sorry.
Combined means with the landscaping. That's the sign and the landscaping.
So my suggestion would be we redesign it. We bring something back to the board that's landscaping focused, or maybe all landscaping, and we make it look as good as we can and declare victory and, live to fight another day.
For clarification, when you say redesign it, is that just landscaping, not trying to find a reusable structure?
Maybe there's something cheap, cheap maybe, but something that's pretty. If not, I would say just landscape it.
We can reach out to Kirk and see
Yeah.
what experience he has.
I mean, we have the Matthews letters are freestanding pin-mounted letters, right? And so if you created a curb for it in some form or fashion and had them there, and the landscaping was a backdrop to it, that would probably be sufficient to some degree. But that's a lot less expensive than putting it all in place and tearing it all out. It's just a bad optic. I'm sorry.
I think one aspect that we do need to remember here is that we've heard from a safety perspective that hiding all of the activity around the roundabout is a positive. So, when you go over there, it's clear. People say, well, I've gotten used to driving through it. You can sit there and watch, and there's still a lot of people who haven't gotten used to it. So that would help to just direct the attention in the one direction where they need to look, and that's the oncoming traffic. So, CJ?
I don't think you heard.
We were just discussing the amount of time it would take to get reapproval through the DOT for a whole new design. And since we wouldn't be able to substantially plant until fall anyway, that gives us a couple of months to work this summer. I don't have much else to do on my plate.
You guys right there.
So we're good, right, Scott? All right.
Take a picture of that thumbs up.
Yeah. I bet you he won't raise it again.
Barbara?
Do we know what Mint Hill thinks about this? Has it been presented to them?
Yeah, so they didn't present it to their board. The managers just said it has a reasonable use of 7 or 8 years. That's great. Move forward with it.
Okay, any other comments? So the direction at this point is to go back and reconsider something less expensive and some landscaping and bring that back to the board.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you everyone for your comments.
Okay. All right, next item on the agenda is the adoption of ordinance designating the Sestar House, Sestar House, tax parcel 193-27114 as a historic landmark. Do we have such a motion?
You swam in there, why don't you make it?
I would make a motion that we designate a historic landmark.
I'll second.
Okay, motion been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item is a discussion about reducing the town's carbon footprint. This particular item came up through conversations I had with some folks at UNCC. And, you know, we talk about reducing a carbon footprint and for the town to do that. And it seems simplistic at times, but I think there's broader aspects of this that we need to think about. You know, we can look at our vehicles, you know, whether those are electric or hydrogen fuel cells. We can look at the fire engines, ambulances, what can we do with those? And of course, we also have recycling that, you know, we've seen a reduction in that. It's not clear to me whether that reduction is because people have stopped recycling or if they're being more picky about what they're putting in there, because obviously there has been an issue with the recyclers about pulling out items that really aren't really not recyclable. The other thing that came up in the conversation is the use of hydrogen fuel cells on trains. UNCC has been working with the European Union on pushing for a transition from the electric lines on the trains and the diesel, et cetera, to hydrogen fuel cells. And they are in the process of doing that. So the question has come back, well, for the Silver Line, should Matthews be pushing for us to have a hydrogen fuel cell train? And interestingly enough, the federal government is also looking at that as a positive in gaining funding for light rail. One thing it does do is it reduces the capital cost by 25% if you don't have to put the lines in. So there's a significant payback on using something as a hydrogen fuel cell. So what I was thinking, and of course this is up to the board whether you want to go in this direction or not, but I would like to ask Public Works and the Environmental Committee to put forth an effort to identify, both on a local level, what we're doing as a town to reduce our carbon footprint, but then again, look on a broader level, a more global level, relative to the projects that we may be involved in and how we might be able to push forward with getting the carbon footprint reduced for those particular items. And, you know, certainly if we can get a hydrogen fuel cell on the light rail coming out here, it would be significantly beneficial from a capital and a carbon footprint reduction perspective. So is there any objection to that, to move forward and make those assignments to the Environmental Committee? Okay. So seeing that, I'll get with CJ and we can, is David Ross now the chairman, or is Gordon still doing it? Okay. But maybe we can catch up with him. I know that David sent an email to Hazen and myself this afternoon regarding some of this. So, yeah. Okay. So we'll move forward with that. Okay, the next item is 14F. As a reminder, we removed 14E from the agenda. This is received the monthly budget report.
Want me to? So you have before you the budget report for ending April. And as you heard earlier in the evening, we are expecting our overall revenues to exceed what we have projected or what we budgeted for last year. So even though we are slightly down on some of the things that we've talked about, some of the adjustments with that, that AX miscalculation, we are making up for it in other areas. So we feel like at the end of the fiscal year, we're going to be in good shape. And our department heads continue to be on track with their expenditures. So we're comfortable at this point that we will end up in a good place at the end of the fiscal year. But certainly if there's any specific questions for any of the line items, happy to take those.
Any questions for Ms. Hawk? Okay, thank you. Next item, 14G, we added to the agenda, and that's to change the first meeting in August. Let me pull up the calendar here and make sure we're... That would be the 5th, is that correct?
So the first meeting would be August 12th.
Currently scheduled.
That's the current.
Yeah.
And so this would change it to the 5th.
Correct.
Correct, all right. Mr. Melton?
Mayor, thank you, Mayor. Have we, historically, will cancel the second meeting in July, which is currently scheduled for July 22nd. Have we done that yet, or is that on an upcoming item?
We have not done that.
We have not done that, and I have not planned to do that. Mr. Higgins?
Just curious, what is the purpose of changing the date?
The Sister City visit is a week of the 12th.
Okay.
And there will be the manager and 3 other individuals on the board will not be available.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so do we have a motion to set the first meeting in August for the 5th? This would be a zoning night and would continue the process just a week earlier.
Are we far enough out in the process to where that wouldn't have an adverse?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those items wouldn't have been accepted yet.
Okay. So I'll make that motion that we reschedule the first meeting in August to August 5th from August 12th.
Second.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, the next item is the mayor's report, and I don't have any report other than to say the CARTPO meeting or planning conferences this week, Thursday and Friday. Dana Stuzinski will be there on Friday, I believe is what she said. The other thing is that we've got the multimodal efforts going on. There was a small group meeting this afternoon. There will be a meeting tomorrow evening, starts at 6 o'clock. We'll be here in this room to have the more formal presentation on that. So I would encourage you to attend. Mr. Attorney.
No report, Mayor.
Town Manager's report.
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We are adjourned.
Yeah.